Okay, everybody, let's sit down around our rug. Let's gather together. We are going to share something that's very meaningful to us.
I brought my plaque from school. It's by Bible memory verses I get every year, and I put a date bar here. We learn a memory verse every month.
This is my penguin. I named him Skipper because that's one of the penguins from Madagascar's names. And my grandma bought him from Alabama.
And what did you bring to share today, Mason?
I didn't bring anything today because I want to share about Jesus.
Well, welcome and good morning. I'd like to welcome all of our extended family in Raymond and Kittery as we are gathered together to open the Word of God together. You guys can remember what show and tell was like, don't you? When you were a little kid and you brought your favorite toy or, thing that you wanted to share with the class. That's a little bit about what I want to start our new series called Show and Tell for the summer. But I'd like to do a little show and tell on a particular experience I had when I was pastoring a church down in Tarrytown, New York. Tarrytown is up the Hudson near the Tappan Zee Bridge, Governor Cuomo Bridge, I think it's called now. But it's just right up north of Yonkers, the Bronx, right? Well, there was a friend of mine, his name was Jeff, and Jeff owned a produce company. And he told me one day, he says, hey, listen, why don't you come with me? He says, I want to give you an education. So if you see on the map, I hate to tell you guys this, but Yankee Stadium is up on the upper right. And then you see Hunts Point. It's on your lower left on that screen. What's interesting about this particular market is that there are three markets really in one. And so a little bit zoomed in picture of this shows you that you have the produce market on the top, you have the meat market, and you have a seafood market. These combined together, they make up the world's largest market. And on their own, the produce is number one in the world still. The others are just number two in the world, separately, but combined, they're the world's largest market. You could look, I gave you an aerial view here of the city, and you could just see it's expansive. And so there are 15,000 trucks that will come through the market in the course of a week. In fact, it has its own train line to move produce all across the country. It runs 24/7, even on holidays. The annual income for this market is in excess of $5 billion. That's a lot of lettuce. The produce market, it provides, like when you walked in there, they would have, it's just so large, but they would have separate buildings just for like potatoes. I remember going into this one area where it was onions, and I never realized that there were so many different kinds of onions you could buy. It was insane. But they had refrigerated space, 1 million square feet of refrigeration. That's like 17 football fields. And so all of this just to keep everything fresh. And then there's the meat market. The meat market, it provides about 35% of the meat for all of the tri-state area. And that brings in, the produce brought in probably about 2.5 million. This brings in just a little around 2 billion, in revenue. And then there's the seafood market. That in and of itself, it also brings in about $1 billion a year. It also provides about 45% of the seafood for the tri-state area as well. But with all of that traffic, with all of that energy, with all of that money that's pouring in there, when you leave that market area, what you see is like a lot of gutted buildings. You see filth on the streets. It's not really a very pretty place. There's this high wall that is all around the market area. And if you notice, it's strewn with barbed wire and fencing across the top. The constant traffic has created such pollution and poor air quality that the residents in the Hunts Point area, their kids report an asthma rate of 3 times what is found in the normal part of the city. And that's just part of the story, because when I went there, as you can imagine, you want to get in and out of this market as quickly as possible. So that's why when I went with my friend Jeff, we left his house at 3:30 in the morning. And when I got there, I found out why, because you needed a parking spot. You had to get there early if you want to get in and out. And I witnessed 2 fights that morning just over parking. I did some research this week and found out that the violence rate in Hunts Point is also the largest in the city. Not only that, there's this prostitution problem. You can imagine 15,000 trucks coming in and out from all over the country. And unfortunately, they would keep this as a thriving business along with its drugs. It's a pretty tough place to be in. I remember standing there thinking to myself, here I stand amidst so much money, so much food, and yet you went out into that neighborhood and you looked around and you just saw like people, their souls were starving. And I thought, here is the bread of heaven that for the most part is left untouched, and people are feeding their souls on garbage. It made me really sad when I walked away, especially when I think that Jesus came to give us life abundant. He came so that we might thrive even in the midst of a broken world. That we might experience something of the fruit of God's Spirit, which is love and joy and peace. But it's a challenge sometimes to be heard over all the clamor that's around you, right? It's hard to get people's attention when there's so much distraction, when your need is pressing in on you on so many different directions. Have you ever found it difficult sometimes to share this hope that you have with Jesus easily with family, with friends, with neighbors? How do you break through the noise? How did Jesus actually promote conversation about God and his purposes? Well, that's what I want to talk to you about. It's all about show and tell, and it's taking a look now at Jesus and how he did that. Because you see, people in our world, man, they really do need hope. They want to hear that there is a God who cares for them, who loves them, no matter what. And so there is a passage that I found in the book of John. It's a story, a familiar story to many of you maybe. It's a story about the Samaritan woman. But it's bigger than just the Samaritan woman. And so I want to go to John chapter 4. It says, Jesus left Judea, and he went back once more to Galilee, and he had to go through Samaria. That's what John 4:1 tells us. Here's a little map. You could see in the middle of the screen there, that's that body of water on the bottom. That's the Dead Sea. And you can see that's the whole region of Judea. If you were just to follow that all the way to the left to the Mediterranean, that's where the Gaza Strip is, right? That's where all this conflict with the world is taking place. But you notice that it says it's on the west side of this river, going towards the Mediterranean, that you find this road. It says in the text that Jesus had to go through Samaria. But the truth of the matter is, back in those days, Jews would avoid this area. They wouldn't go through Samaria because there was a lot of tension between them and the Samaritans. They would rather cross over near the river and then go up and circumvent that whole area. So when you read this, it should hit you as a curiosity, like, why does he have to go through there when most of the Jews would not? It says he came to this town called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. It was about noon. And so you get this picture, right? Jesus, he's tired. He's been on this long journey, sits down by this well, and they make a point of telling you that it's Jacob's well, that this is land that was given from Jacob to his father. If those of you who have been through our Casket Empty series, right, where we looked at the Old Testament a little bit, you realize this is a plot of land. Sychar is also called Shechem in the Old Testament. It's where God first appeared to Abraham and gave him that promise that he would bless them, that he would give him all this land. Abraham and Jacob lived in this area. Joseph's bones would be buried in this area. There's a lot of history. And here's Jesus now. He's tired, and he sits down by this well. It's about the noon hour. And then the story continues. It says, a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and she says to him, and Jesus says to her, will you give me a drink? And the text says, because his disciples had gone off into the town to buy food. As I said, there's a twisted history with the Samaritans. It dates all the way back to the times when the Assyrians came and overwhelmed the northern empire of Israel, the northern kingdom. And many of them began to intermarry with the Assyrians, and it just became a mess. And so those who were true to following after the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they kind of kept them off at arm's distance. And so when Jesus then says to her, can you give me a drink? Any Jewish person would think, what in the world are you asking this woman for a drink? And the implication is that he doesn't have any utensils, so you're going to drink from my utensils, from my cup? Now, the disciples weren't there to hear this because they're off in the town buying food. And so Jesus then uses this as an opportunity, and he steers the conversation. It's an interesting story, but my focus this morning is on what Jesus does to provide us with some insight on how we can show and tell this good news about Jesus. So let me just give you the upshot of what happens. Jesus talks to this woman, and in the course of the conversation, Jesus is going to reveal himself to her as the Son of God. He's going to tell her that he is the promised Messiah that was to come. So in verse 27, I want to pick this up with you now. It says, just then, after Jesus has revealed himself to this Samaritan woman, the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want, or why are you talking with her? So you see, in this part of the story now, you have Jesus, you have the Samaritan woman, and you have his disciples. And so I want to ask you a question. Are your eyes open to those who are around you? Because I think one of the things that you learn from Jesus in this story is that his eyes are definitely open. He's open to those around him. But you notice the disciples, when they come, the text just told us, right? Nobody asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? You see, they didn't see anything. They were blinded by their prejudice disguised as piety. They wanted to appear like they were all godly men, right? But they had no time for this woman. She was completely ignored. And part of their traditions, when you go back, the rabbinic traditions, these are some of the sayings that they had. They said, let no one talk with a woman on the street. No, not with his own wife. I wonder if that would apply to cars. Just thinking out loud. Better the words of the law be burned than to be shared with a woman. Whoa. There's a Thanksgiving prayer that's offered at a service in a synagogue, and it was, blessed art thou, O Lord, that thou hast not made me a woman. So if you grow up in this kind of environment, and culturally there's all this hatred, all this animosity, how quick are you to really pay attention then? They didn't even bother to find out why Jesus was talking to the woman. Who cares what she wanted? And here's the funny thing. In the story, it says that when the disciples come and they're thinking this to themselves, right? It says, then leaving her water jar, the woman went back into the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ? And they came out of the town and made their way towards Jesus. Have you ever been in a situation where you don't really know that, you don't really know the people? How long does it take you to realize whether you're wanted or not? I mean, you could really, like in a nanosecond, right? You just think like, yeah, I'm out of here. So this woman engaged Jesus in this whole conversation. Jesus pulled information out of her and shared with her. And then the disciples show up, and in a second, she's gone. You know, I find that people, they'll say to me, like, hey, I don't have a problem with Jesus. I just have a problem with his followers. And so now, here they are, and so you could see that the disciples, they didn't see anything. Well, what did the woman see? Well, actually, she was a little bit more bold about her prejudices, because earlier in the text, if you were to go back and read it, you'd find that her response to Jesus when he asked her for a water, she says, listen, you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan woman. How could you ask me for a drink? And she was quick to just draw the line and said, listen, buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're kind of stepping out of the line here. But after spending some time with Jesus, she responded to his invitation, as you see, because she went into the town to tell everybody who she had just met. And now they're all coming back. But what did Jesus see? When you read the story, you saw that Jesus finds himself with a woman who is no doubt familiar with heartache, who's not walking in righteousness, who's been searching for companionship. The Bible will tell you that Jesus, at one point in the conversation, says, listen, why don't you go home, get your husband, and come back, and we'll talk some more. And the woman says, I have no husband. And Jesus looks at her and says, you answered correctly, because you've had 5, and the guy that you're living with now is not your husband. Booyah. And then you have this idea of the well. See, like sometimes when the Bible gives you facts, you shouldn't just go past them too quickly, because usually there are little hints about something about this story that needs to be dug out a little bit. So for instance, she went to Jacob's well, right? If you were to do any study here about the town of Sychar, that's not the popular well in the city. In fact, it's kind of out of the way. And then it says that Jesus came to this well and it was noon. You don't go getting water at noon in the heat of the day. I mean, you get water to drink, but if you had to get water to do, cleaning or, clothes or food, right? Like you're going to go early in the day. So now put this all together. Here's a woman, 5 husbands, living with a guy that's not her husband, going to an out-of-the-place well at a weird time of the day. You start putting all this stuff together, right? And you just realize, like, well, hey, maybe there's something else going on here. And what does it all mean? There's obviously a need here, but what's going on in this woman's life that she would have responded to what Jesus had to say? See, Jesus saw in this woman an opportunity. This encounter now was a result of the Father really setting a table, and Jesus now is about to introduce himself to this woman and no doubt change her life. So let's just say this is his first step. Like, then how open are you to the people that are around you? When you have conversation, do you see their pain, frustration? People call for help in a number of different ways. Do you see their tears? If you were here last week, you heard Sarah Purdue talked about, she went to this prayer class that we had, right, a training. And she wound up stopping to get gas. And while she's pumping gas, she looks over and there's this young girl in a car. And she's beside herself, just weeping. And Sarah's pumping her gas and she's like, yeah, I don't know. Should I get involved? Really, should I not get involved? And then she was like, I just finished leaving a prayer class that told me to pray for people. So she walks over and taps on the door. And she says, look, it's obvious that you're having a problem. Is there anything I can do for you? And she did wound up praying with that lady and shared information. And the woman was so taken back that somebody would just stop for a moment. Now, I don't know how God will use that in that person's life, but I bet you she'll never walk away again without remembering that moment. See, Jesus is calling us to open our eyes, but he's also asking us to do something else. Jesus is sitting there with his disciples, so now they come back. The woman leaves, and they say to Jesus, Rabbi, eat something. Jesus looks at them and says, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. At which point the disciples start looking at each other and said, could someone have brought him food? Again, you see, they're thinking, there's no way. These are all Samaritans around here. He's not going to eat food with them. He's not going to break bread with them. And so they return with food, but Jesus appears to already have eaten. In John chapter 34, this is a punchline here. He says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. See, Jesus was all about this opportunity that he just engaged in. And that's the second step here. Not only that you have to look around, right? But God's asking us to look for the opportunities. Jesus saw that with this woman. He told them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do not say 4 more months and then the harvest. This is what it says in verse 35, right? He says, look at the fields. Well, what is he talking about? Well, when you read this, it says, do you not say 4 months more and then the harvest, which is implying then that the harvest is not then, right? It's saying if we were having a conversation, I'd say, hey, look, if we were in the middle of winter, you're not going to, start talking about your flowers blooming. You'd have to wait a couple of months. Jesus is saying to his disciples, look, 4 more months and then the harvest is coming. You say that, right? But I'm telling you, look at the fields because they are ripe to harvest. See, I believe that what Jesus is saying here in this moment is that when he tells them to look at the fields, there's nothing in the fields to see except what did it say when the woman went into the town to tell her friends everything that Jesus told her? It says they came back with her because they wanted to talk to Jesus themselves. See, I think that when Jesus says, look at the fields, they are ripe for harvest, it's because he's looking at the people who are coming back with the Samaritan woman. And what do they look like? Well, if you just look on the outside, you say, that's different from me. They're Samaritans. That's a woman. What do I have to do with them? We have nothing in common. And sometimes, when you're trying to build bridges with people, there are a lot of obstacles that you have to go through, right? There could be cultural things. There could be personal prejudices that we have that you have to lay aside. It's kind of hard, man, to come past that. And so we just ignore it. But if you really look closer, it's not so much that we're so unalike. The truth of the matter is we're very much alike. We all share dreams. We've all had our share of successes and failures. People have weathered storms. They've labored a long time. We're all looking for a little bit of peace. Maybe some rest for our soul. That's why here in verse 39 it says, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. See, Jesus, he opened his eyes to those around him, and he saw the opportunity, and he took advantage of it. And he ate the Father's food. You see, here's the question then. Are you hungry? It's interesting that the woman went off to tell the people everything that she had ever done. Don't you find that odd? Like, it would be one thing to turn around and say, hey, I met Jesus. He's we've been reading in the scriptures about this Messiah, and he claims to be him. Like, yeah, but there's no mention of that. But it has everything to do with the way in which Jesus told this good news story so that she walks away feeling different about herself and about this Messiah now that stood before her. I thought, to be understood and not rejected, that could be a gift. To be exposed and yet covered by mercy. To be shown our guilt and then offered forgiveness. See, this is what this woman needed to hear. And this is what she wanted to share. Come and meet the one who knows all about me and has given me a drink of this living water. See, I think our family and friends, they need the same thing. The work that Jesus was speaking about is this Father's food. So are your eyes open? Are you aware of the opportunity? Are you hungry? When you meet them, will you know what to say? Will you know how to say it? Because many are looking for this love of Jesus to be expressed. They want us to empathize, to be genuinely transparent. They want hope. We have, I got bridged. They're part of our family here. They run Recovery Church on Wednesday nights down in Portsmouth. It's a way of taking the 12 steps and injecting Jesus front and center and showing how this relationship now that we have with a God who loves us and cares for us can really set us free from a whole lot of bad hurt and poor choices. I think that's one of the reasons why those 12-step programs are so, enticing, because people get to come and you get wounded healers, people who have been there and done that and now found life on the other side, and they're willing to share that with whoever would listen. Do you think of yourself as Sinners Anonymous? My name is Bruce, and I'm a sinner. Right. People don't want to be talked down to. They'd want to know that, hey, you struggle like I do. That's one of the steps that I have to overcome sometimes when I talk to people. Because if all they know about me is like, oh, he's the pastor of the church, man, their walls, they just come up right away. And you got to find ways to take advantage of the opportunities, to really look at the people who are sitting before you You know, when you're a parent and your kid comes and he's acting out, you kind of sit there and think, okay, this is really not the problem. Something is going on that is really at the bottom of all this. So rather than get caught up on all of this stuff up here, every once in a while you sit down and you have that really good conversation to find out what's really bothering you. See, I think that's what Jesus does for us. And he wants you to recognize that the only way that we're going to make a difference in this world is if we start eating the Father's food. When Jesus says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work, it didn't give him indigestion. And so I think it's harvest time. And if we don't tell them, who's going to share? Why is it that so many of us really don't want to eat this food? I think maybe it's because we filled ourselves with good work instead of being filled with God's will. Maybe our lives are so stuffed with wholesome activities that there's no room for holiness. Because, see, we're managing the outside person. We want people to think, hey, I'm culturally sensitive. I'm a culture warrior, but I'm not going to go next door to help somebody, or I'm not going to cross the street. I'm not going to open my eyes to the people who are in need around me and actually do something. It's easy to sign a petition. It's easy to send off a little text. It's easy to take a little Snapchat. But it's a lot different to eat the Father's food, to open your eyes and see the issues around you and engage and help, and then take this gospel, this good news of Jesus, and find a way to make that appropriate. I think that maybe we've overindulged on a diet of outward spirituality, but there's little room left for the Spirit's food. We can listen to all the worship music you want. Oh, this is awesome. But if all those truths, they don't sink from your head down into your heart, then what are we eating? Something is awry when the work of God results in stress and depression and frustration. One of the things now, I'm getting to be an old guy, right? So I sit down with all these young pastors and we sit around, we have these conversations. And they talk about getting burnt out. And I'm like, yo, dude, Jesus said, tired, hungry, in fact, the real story is if you go back, they've already chased them out of Judea. So he's facing all this hostility, all this confrontation, being misunderstood. He's doing all of this stuff, right? And yet he still has time for this Samaritan woman, and he says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his task. So I tell my young peers, I tell them, like, maybe you're eating the wrong food. Because Jesus appears to be nourished, strengthened, even in the midst of the hardships. Something is awry when the work of God results in this kind of depression. Something is not right when our labors for the kingdom become a burden. Something is not right when Christians turn inward and cannot be moved, when our energies are consumed and our tanks are dry. Because now I have nothing left to give. Because you have to feed your own soul. It's got to make a difference in your life. Otherwise, all these words about Jesus are not going to deter you from doing your will over against his. Are you hungry? My prayer is that you may never lose your appetite for the Father's food. I pray that you eat the Father's food, because now is not the time for a diet. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you for just this story of Jesus taking the time to not only minister to the Samaritan woman, but also to minister to his disciples, to teach them and show them what is going to be required of us who name the name of Jesus, to be more aware of the people around us, to look for those opportunities, and then to feast on them when they present themselves. And how we do that can come in a myriad of ways, Father. It can be like Sarah, just tapping on a window and noticing that someone is in distress. It could be the way Freddie and his whole team come and extend a ride, an invitation. It's the way a congregation can embrace one another and show love. It's the way we go out into the community and let our light shine so men would see our good work and glorify our Father in heaven. This means, Lord, that we need to be open to your Spirit. We need to be empowered, not afraid. Because when we do, you promise to give us a peace that passes all understanding. You promise to add to your numbers, to extend this kingdom of heaven to include all kinds of people, including the likes of us. So I pray, Lord, that we would feast on your will and that you would receive all the glory. For I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.